My role at the IEA is basically a lead on energy efficiency markets, and I've been kind of managing the energy efficiency market report now for 3 years. I think this is the third year that I've come to this seminar in some capacity to talk about the market report. So, so thank you for having me. I guess being invited back is a sign that you've at least impressed some people. So thank you very much. And I will try to keep on schedule, but I just have so many interesting things to say that I'm sorry, Paul and Eve. You know, I might just eat into your time. So, but I will try to keep on target. So with that, I guess we'll just start talking about the World Energy Outlook, because it came out a couple weeks ago, and it kind of revised our projections for renewable energy, provided new scenarios on the 2 degrees, the well below 2 degrees, and a 1.5 degree scenario. We'll get into that a little later. But with respect to this presentation, I just wanted to emphasize again, this is probably not news to anybody, but we've been concluding this now for years, in that energy efficiency is really the keystone of any trajectory to get to 2 degrees. And so what this chart is showing you is that basically the NPS, the CPS is here. This is just basically if we locked all policies in that were existing as of, oh great. Should be working. Okay, great. And the point, oh yeah, okay. So I don't even need to move over. So that's basically if we locked in all policies as of the summer of 2016. That's what our projection of emissions would be. But we have anticipations of what policies will come out, especially related to the NDCs and the Paris Agreement. And that means that in our new policy scenario, which is that blue line, that's where emissions will go. And efficiency actually is the largest wedge there, as indicated by that 39%, to bring emissions down from current policies to new policies. And then after that, to get to the 450 down there, efficiency and renewables go hand in hand. But essentially what I want to say is that they're essentially equal in terms of their contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions between current policies and the 450 scenario. Just again, it's slightly more complicated than that, because efficiency works as well in the power sector. So in the 450 scenario, we drastically drive down the emissions intensity of the power sector. So it goes from 530 grams per kilowatt hour to 330, well, I know this is being recorded, it's 300 and something grams per kilowatt hour in the NPS, and it drives down to 80 grams per kilowatt hour in the 450. But in fact, I just wanted to show you that reduced electricity demand is a key component. In fact, it's the growth in energy savings from energy efficiency is about as large as the growth in wind, solar, and hydro combined between now and 2040 in the NPS. That isn't reflected in the chart because that shows saved emissions, but if you looked at it just on energetic terms, the saved energy from efficiency is as large as those things. And in terms of the abatement potential, reduced energy is about a quarter of the total abatement potential in the power sector. So getting our power sector emissions down to 80 grams per kilowatt hour is not simply about renewables, it's also about efficiency. But of course, renewables is incredibly important. And just on renewables, I work very closely with, we have 4 or 5 market reports. There's the efficiency, renewables, oil, gas, and coal. We work very closely with the renewable market report. And what we find is there's actually some green shoots. There's optimistic signs that things are headed in the right direction, at least on the low carbon power supply. So, last year, 90% of all new power additions were renewable energy, which is incredible. And what we will see is that, then that's globally, excuse me, is that, there's our 2 degree, our 450 scenario. That's what generation is from renewable energy in 2020. And this is what our market report projects using the existing policies. It's a much more granular and fine-grained projection, just going to 5 years. And you can see that they're roughly on track to 2020. That's a good sign. I just want to say, though, that if we go this out to, this is an exponential curve, so to get to 2030, we require a lot more effort and will. But still, there's good signs that renewables, at least for now, are on track. and in line with our climate goals. Unfortunately, though, energy efficiency or energy intensity gains are not on track. So there's room to be optimistic and there's room to be pessimistic here. The optimism would say that, well, the intensity improvement in 2015 was about 3 times the intensity improvement over the previous decade. That's great. That shows that maybe there is some larger systemic shift happening to greater efficiency and greater intensity reductions. We can't say for sure yet, but maybe. But still, we need to add another third to that intensity reduction between now and actually not between now, but that actually needs to step up immediately. So this is the annual intensity gain between now and 2030 to achieve the 450 scenario, to achieve our 2 degree scenario. So we have to step up our action, our action to reduce energy intensity, by another third immediately and have that endure from now until 2030. So that's the scale of the challenge. And this presentation will kind of outline whether we're on track or what we need to do to step that up. So that's where the energy efficiency market report comes in. It's the IEA's way to explain what's going on in energy efficiency. We look at the market trends, we look at deployment, we look at the drivers in policies, we look at how the changing energy prices have impacted investment in energy efficiency, and all of the money and investment and finance and business opportunity that's being made by energy efficiency itself. Fundamentally, though, the efficiency report is a call to action. We need more energy efficiency, and this is the IEA's flagship report and kind of explaining that to policymakers and to lay people and people in this room. So just a quick story about energy demand. We have a detailed database of energy efficiency indicators for all IEA countries at the IEA. And we can develop scenarios and ask ourselves, what if energy efficiency had not improved over the past 15 years? And we can develop what's called a no efficiency scenario. And that's what you see in the blue line here. What I'll point out to you about that scenario is that energy consumption is about 12% higher than levels in the year 2000. It is growing by about 1% a year since the financial crisis. And in 2015, it would have surpassed the all-time peak in energy consumption in 2007. So that's just basically saying, our analysis basically says, let's just imagine that our population, our economy, the structure of our economy all grew and changed as has just happened through the past 15 years. But the efficiency of all of the energy consuming technologies that we use didn't change. It remained stuck in the year 2000. So we were still driving old cars from the year 2000, watching TV on those cathode ray tubes. We still had laptops that weighed 20 kilograms, that kind of thing. But we had just as much of them in the year 2000. That's how much energy we would need. I don't know if you follow energy demand trends, but if you did, you would know that that actually hasn't happened. In fact, actual energy consumption, as depicted in this green line, shows that it is down absolutely in 2015 from 2000 levels. It's down almost 1%. It is below the 2007 peak, and based on the WEO scenarios, it looks like this 2007 peak will be an all-time peak, at least for the duration of our scenarios out to 2100. So that's the role that energy efficiency is having. The difference between these two lines actually is what we can say, this is how much energy efficiency is saving. And the difference there actually is the total primary energy supply of Japan. And Japan is the second largest energy consumer in the IEA. So energy efficiency actually is having a very material impact on the global energy system. We already have one Japan, we don't need two. And that's the role that energy efficiency is playing. Getting a bit more detailed, we can look at energy efficiency trends in Europe. So as we show, this is using IEA's data and data from Odyssey Muir, is that, and it looks like my chart is slightly messed up, but this blue line is residential buildings. You can't see that there. But residential buildings efficiency has improved about 25% over the past 15 years. And that's because there's been ambitious policy on residential buildings. I don't need to explain to this audience how much policy has been happening in buildings at the EU level, but significantly so after 2000. And importantly, actually, freight transport has very little efficiency policy, and actually that you see that the actual energy intensity of the freight sector is increasing. And so you're probably asking, I just want to go back, what does this all mean? Well, actually, we go down to this level to do our decomposition analysis, and we have data of appliance energy use, and we can go back and we can say, here's what the average household appliances would have consumed in electricity in 1990. And here's roughly what household appliances consume 20 years later. And the difference there is about 1 megawatt hour per year per household. So you can see that the gradual turnover, small efficiency gains over time can lead to significant savings to save that amount of energy. That's you put that together over the millions of households in the IEA, and you can imagine what impact that's having on the energy supply system and on avoided energy use. If we avoid that energy use, we also avoid greenhouse gas emissions. So we say to ourselves, well, how much more fossil fuels would we have needed to consume back in that scenario where we didn't improve efficiency? And it turns out that it would have been, between IEA countries and China, about 3 billion tons of CO2 emissions. Cumulatively over this period, so the area of that triangle is about 16 billion tons. That's about 4% of the budget to the 1.5 degree scenario. China in particular, China's avoiding as much greenhouse gas emissions as is emitted by Japan, which is, I believe, the fourth or fifth largest emitter in the world. So efficiency gains in China alone are emitting that of a major emitting country. And in fact, that's led us to conclude that efficiency gains in China have been the single most important national policy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions around the world. It's not just about emissions, it's about other things that we care about. It's about energy expenditure. So we use the IEA's detailed retail energy prices database and mix that with our energy savings to come up with an estimate of how much avoided energy expenditure is happening. It's about 530 billion across all IEA countries in 2015, 4 trillion cumulatively. In the largest EU countries, it was about 280 billion or 600 euros per capita. Hopefully you can see that draft do not cite, because this is kind of data that we're playing with. This isn't published in the market report, but this is something that I'm very interested in, is how is efficiency reducing the impact of increasing energy prices? So here you see here, let's look at Germany. This is our index of how retail energy prices, the weighted average cost of energy for a household in Germany, how has it increased over the past 10 years? Well, it's gone up about 60%. But the red line is what our estimate is of the proportion of disposable household income that is spent on energy. And as you see, actually, it's below 2004 levels. So even though energy prices have increased by about 60%, the proportion, the actual effective cost to households is down. And what's going on? Well, total final consumption in Germany is down, and that seems to be led by energy efficiency. Of course, if we're avoiding energy, we're avoiding greenhouse gases, we're also avoiding energy imports. Nowhere is this more important than in the EU, where it is avoiding about 27 billion US dollars in imports in 2015. The EU makes up half of all the avoided energy imports from energy efficiency across IEA countries. That avoided import bill is about 10% of the EU's total import bill. And you can imagine what impact that is having on current accounts and national ledgers and so on and so forth. So it's incredibly important. Mixed, the energy security question. Here's analysis from this year's WEO, just to show that actually net oil imports in a lot of major countries are going to be going down, or down relative to a no efficiency scenario. So that's what net oil imports were in 2014 in the United States. And that's what we forecast that, or project them to be, not forecast, we project them, by 2040. And as you can see there, efficiency is the largest wedge to reduce the oil import dependence in the United States. Again, it's the largest in all of the countries. So in the US and EU, it's about 2/3 of the avoided imports come from efficiency gains. It's even larger in China and India. So efficiency has to be seen as one of the critical components to energy security and improving energy security across major countries. The report this year focuses a little bit on China, and I like the China story because it really clearly depicts the role of policy. So there's GDP in China since 2000. There's total primary energy supply since 2000 in China. They go hand in hand. They're basically in lockstep. The Chinese realized this was a problem, and they implemented the 11th five-year plan, which was the first framework efficiency policy for China. They had efficiency policy for a long time. They've had standards since 1989, but this was the first framework on all sectors, focusing on the industrial sector. And there you can see that it seems to be having a concerted impact. And something very interesting is going on in China currently. Primary energy demand in China this year was at the lowest levels. The growth in primary energy demand, was the lowest it's been since 1997. It's well below the 10-year average of about 7.7% growth. It was 0.9% in 2015. And it goes to show just how important China is on improving the global energy intensity. So China makes up over a quarter of the global energy intensity improvement in 2015. Just focusing further on China, here's our decomposition analysis of China, which I believe is one of the first that's been conducted in the world to this detail. So we look at 91% of final energy consumption in China. And as you can see there, you're saying to yourself, these are energy savings from energy efficiency. And you're probably wondering to yourself, geez, what does that mean, negative savings? Well, it means actually that energy efficiency levels in China worsened from 2000 to 2005. Had energy efficiency levels in China just stayed at 2000 levels, they would have needed 120 million tons of oil equivalent less energy consumption. That's about the energy consumption of Italy. So just worsening energy efficiency was adding an Italy's worth of energy consumption. And then there you see, 2005, 2006 is when the 11th five-year plan is implemented. And now China is saving about 330 million tons of oil equivalent. That's the primary energy demand of Germany. Interestingly, the energy savings, if you index them to 2000, are about as large as China's entire renewable energy supply. And China has the world's largest renewable energy supply. The growth between there and in energy savings is about 3 times the growth in the renewable energy supply. That leads us to believe that efficiency is really China's #1 no-carbon fuel. The other important point to know about China is that when you look at this blue line is our estimation of how much avoided coal consumption was happening in China. That's about 350 million tons. To give a sense of how much that is, that's about 30% of the volume of traded ton globally in 2015. So why is all of this happening? Why is efficiency improving? We believe at the IEA that policy has a really important role. We asked ourselves, how much of a role is policy having? How much energy consumption is policy impacting? So we developed a detailed database of all of the mandatory policies, so mandatory minimum energy performance standards, energy savings targets, that kind of thing in the world. And we looked at their implementation date. We estimated how much equipment, refrigerators, vehicles, that those minimum performance standards were affecting, and then how much energy consumption was taking place by that equipment. We said in 2000, about 11% of global energy consumption was covered by standards and mandatory energy efficiency policies. And by 2015, that had increased to 30%. You can see for some sectors, it's been dramatic, such as in lighting with less than 5% of lighting energy consumption covered by standards in 2000, and now over 60% of lighting energy consumption is covered by standards. Still, though, some areas show room for improvement. Heavy-duty vehicles and electric motors. We'll get a bit into that later on. But it's not just about the increase in standards. You also have to ratchet them up. You have to tighten them. You have to strengthen them. So, for example, the United States implemented standards on vehicles, that's corporate average fuel economy standards, in 1978. But they didn't update the standards for about 20 years after the mid-80s. So it's not just something to have standards. You need to improve them. So this year we implemented, or we developed what we call the EPPI, which is the Efficiency Policy Progress Index, which takes the growth in coverage multiplied by the increase in the stringency of standards. And we can do that by end use, by country, by sector. And this is showing it by end use. So we say, how have the expansion and the tightening of standards increased for each major end use? And you can see there, air conditioning has had the highest growth in the application of standards. That makes sense. There wasn't a lot of standards on air conditioning prior to 2005. But there has been a lot of effort since then, particularly Japan, Korea, the United States, EU. But again, kind of the commercial sectors, or the industrial sectors, represented by heavy-duty vehicles and electric motors, lagging behind. Just to get on motors for a little bit, this is analysis from the World Energy Outlook, where we have a detailed look at motors. And I can't stress enough how important motors are to the future of electricity demand. So remember when I was talking about how 25% of the decarbonization in the power sector was from reduced energy demand? Well, at least half of that is from motor efficiency. Motors represent half of the world's electricity consumption, and over half of industrial electricity consumption. In the 450 scenario, we improve motor efficiency by about 41%. And as you see there, actually, it's not about more efficient motors. Motors are already getting to be pretty efficient. We have to get to a systems-based approach that uses VSDs, end-use devices, so linking motors with more efficient fridges, better insulated fridges, for example, so the pump doesn't need to work as hard. And then system-wide efforts, such as preventative maintenance, improving the efficiency of the motor-based system. In this effect, we can think about efficient motors being another type of low-carbon power supply. Just like solar power or wind power. And in fact, it's very cheap. So in the in the 450 scenario, we invest about $300 billion cumulatively between now and 2040 in efficient motors. But that offsets about $450 billion in needed power infrastructure. You were getting basically a 50% coupon on every dollar you invested in efficient motors and efficient motor systems. Finally, just to please our European audiences, I'm from that country there. Yeah. Come on, Canada. Something's happening for Canada. You just wait in the next 6 months. The EPPI's been led by large European countries, so France and Germany. This is almost exclusively developments in the residential sector. So you're saying to yourself, great, we've done a lot of good stuff on standards. I want to tell you that there's actually a lot more to give for standards. So we asked ourselves, well, what if the world's stock of, say, air conditioners complied with just a basic average standard? How much energy would that save? So we used our World Energy model to calculate that. We said all of the air conditioners in the world were now at an average efficiency level based on all the countries that had implemented air conditioning standards. And we would have found that, had that been the case, we would have reduced air conditioning energy consumption by about 30% in 2015. Interestingly, for space heating, most cold countries have average level standards. So you're not going to get a lot of additional reductions in energy consumption for space heating. But if you move to the highest existing standards, you can get an additional 15%. I haven't included the bar here, but if you go to a best in class or best available technology, you go all the way up to about 60%. So there's still significant potential for standards and technologies. Of course, it's not just about standards. And this is where we get into the issue that's near and dear to my heart. It's markets and making these things, making efficiency more cost competitive. So here you see what our cost curves have been for LED lighting in the United States and India. The cost of LED lighting is down by about 90% over the past 6 years. And based on our working group with the IEA 4E Technology Collaboration Partnership, we estimated what the avoided electricity consumption was from LED lighting. It was about 110 terawatt hours in 2015. Just to give you some context of how much 110 terawatt hours is, it's about half of the growth of electricity generation in 2015. So LED lighting was basically reducing our needed generation by about a third in 2015. Goes to show that small little bulbs and technologies can have a pretty important impact at the global scale. All that efficiency required investment. So I think we're the only agency crazy enough to try and estimate investment. But this year we developed a new methodology. I know much to the consternation of many of the people that follow our investment methodology, but this year is the best one yet. Yeah, next year, I promise next year's will be more or less the same. Just don't ask questions. So it was about 221 billion in 2015. Importantly, actually it grew by about 6% in 2015. So even though energy prices were down, headline crude oil prices were down by about 60% over that period, efficiency investment still grew by 6%, and that was driven by investment in the building sector, which grew by about 9%. Which goes to show that there's some other stimulus that's going on that's driving efficiency investment, not necessarily just energy prices. The other important finding that we found is we used a detailed database of vehicle purchases around the world, and it was unclear actually how much more efficient vehicles costed than just regular vehicles. We had to do a lot of refining of the analysis to come up with a sense that yes, efficient vehicles are more expensive, to the point that we were asking questions that maybe they aren't more expensive. The other important indicator for the market is that the energy efficiency services market appears poised for growth. Well, the first point is that the energy efficiency services market is very large indeed. It's about $24 billion. It's dominated by China. And the number of mergers and acquisitions for energy efficiency firms has been going up steadily over the past 15 years. Well, not steadily, but there's an upward trend. The number of companies that are getting involved is also diversifying. So it's not just larger ESCOs buying smaller ESCOs. It's technology providers. It's equipment manufacturers such as ABB. It's utilities. There's a large heterogeneity in the amount of acquiring companies for energy service firms. We think that's a positive, healthy sign for the market. One thing I will say, oh, this is China. I apologize that this isn't, this looks great on my laptop. In China, China's ESCO market was growing by about 7% a year over the past 10 years. The United States has doubled the size of its market of the previous 10 years. But I will say, actually, for the European Union, it's been more or less kind of flat growth. So that's something to ponder. So I'll just go through some of the key messages of the market report then to summarize. So unlike other energy resources, efficiency is the one resource that all countries possess in abundance. And it's action through standards, it's action through smart policy. It's at the fingertips of policymakers, in fact. It doesn't matter what natural resource endowments you have. Global efficiency gains are accelerating even despite current low energy prices, but they need to step up further. Global investment grew by 6%. Energy efficiency is now impacting global energy commodity markets, like what I was talking about with the avoided 350 million tons of coal in China. And we still need more policy. Although 30% of energy consumption is covered by standards, if you've probably figured out that 70% of energy consumption is not covered by mandatory policies. What the right mix is, I'm not saying that 100% needs to be covered, but is that the right mix? I don't know. And so finally, I remember last year I got a lot of questions on the 1.5 degree. This was kind of right during the middle of COP or right after COP. So I just wanted to bring up some points on the 1.5 degree and kind of the future trajectory of low emission scenarios. So this is from the World Energy Outlook this year. And so just importantly to note, 2015 saw kind of a pause in the growth of emissions. In the past 100 years, there's only been 4 of those pauses, and 3 of them came at a time of like economic unrest. So it was the 1980s, 1992, 2009. So this came at a time of global economic expansion. So maybe something is actually up. Importantly, though, the difference between these scenarios is that I'll just focus you on the new policies in the 450. In new policies, this includes all of the NDCs, this includes the Paris Agreement. Primary energy demand still grows by about 40% globally between now and 2040. And in the 450 scenario, it only grows by about 9%. So effectively, we are almost fully decoupling economic growth from primary energy demand. Is that possible? A lot of people talk about whether that's possible. I don't know, but I'll just throw some things up in the air. This is OECD Europe, or this is the best representation I could make of OECD Europe using a bunch of different data sources. And here's indexed to 1820, GDP and total primary energy. So by 1900, you would have been saying to yourself, it is completely impossible to increase GDP without another 5-fold increase in primary energy. But instead, if we index it again to 1900, we see that going back, we see a similar trend that, in fact, we can greatly decouple economic value from primary energy consumption. And while it's still growing here, this is more in line with the NPS, not the 450. It does say that actually, if we get serious, who knows what is possible? I don't want to say, though, this is not going to be difficult. So there's lots of anecdotes you can take over how difficult it will be to achieve the 450. All I have to say is just take a look at China, for example. In our market report this year, we said, well, China is basically in a GDP per capita that Japan was in 1968. And we can take Japan's trajectory of development from 1968 until now to show kind of what Chinese energy demand and energy intensity might be. And that's that line there. Well, there's the 450 line. It's about half as more intensive, or fully 100% more intensive than what China needs to be. And again, I apologize for these charts. Than what China needs to be by 2030. That's what China needs to be. Let's just walk that across. In fact, China needs to be less energy intensive in 15 years than Japan is currently today. We've started modeling the World Energy Outlook has started modeling the below 2 degrees, the well below, and the 1.5 degrees. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'll just throw this out because I know that people were interested in it last year. The takeaway for me, at least, from this is that 2 degrees, below 2 degrees, and 1.5 degrees is a question of when do you get to zero emissions? You need to get to zero emissions. The question is when. So in a 1.5 degree case, we have 25 years. So by 2040, for example, in the 450 scenario, fully a third of all vehicles are electric. In the 1.5 degree, or sorry, in the well below degree, it's 3/4 of the vehicles are electric. You may notice that there's actually only about a 2 gigaton difference between the 450 and the well below in 2040. So 2 gigatons, that's not too bad. In fact, the 450 is already so ambitious that all that's left is very hard emissions reductions to get further than that. So, as a line says in the World Energy Outlook, marginal reductions in emissions require non-marginal changes to the energy system. And the other thing I'd point out is that from 2 to 5 is not, from 2 to 1.5, excuse me, is not a 25% reduction in your carbon budget. It's a 2/3 reduction in your carbon budget. So I'll just end with some closing thoughts on what we think about this for energy efficiency transition, as I hope I've punctuated that that's what we need. I just read this book over the summer and I thought this was a great quote. So it is tempting to write the history of technology through the products, the wheel, the microscope, the airplane, and the internet. I feel like that's what we're doing in energy efficiency now. But it's more illuminating to write the history of technology through transitions. Linear motion to circular motion, visual space to subvisual space, motion on land to motion in the air, physical connectivity to virtual connectivity. And the question that I would ask this audience or for the discussion session is, are we in a transition for energy efficiency and energy productivity? And if we are, where are we now and where are we going? Finally, I'm about 5 minutes over time, so the report is free to download. The energy efficiency market, the WEO is not, I'm sorry. But the energy efficiency market report is free to download here. And we also have here a mobile enhanced microsite for the report that nobody reads PDFs anymore, I understand. We all read it on our phone. So if you want to read this on your phone in a tight, snappy little summation, then please go there and check out the report. Thank you.